Let's talk about the Golden Angelic Elite Guard of the Blood Angels, with an overview of the new Sanguinary Guard and what they can do on the tabletop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Blood Angels once more, and in this video I thought we'd do an overview of the Sanguinary Guard, talking about the models and their lore, looking over their datasheet and damage output, and a few fun synergies and combos on the tabletop. Sanguinary Guard are basically the elite honor guard of the Blood Angels, a formation dating all the way back to the Horus Heresy, and in the current setting they fight protecting Dante and other high-ranking captains of the chapter. They're clad in artificer armor and armed with uncommon blades, and basically act as the exemplars of the host, a level above even the ferocious jump-pack troops of the rest of the chapter. As well as their fancy power weapons, they also make good use of Angelus bolters, bolt weapons as wrist-mounted pistols, and wear their characteristic golden armor, the death mask of Sanguinius resplendent on their helms. At time of recording, they're still not released individually yet. They'll likely be £37, €47 or $60 from Games Workshop, going by other similar free model kits. And likely for a lot of Blood Angels players, the best place to get them might be the Combat Patrol, the one with 10 Assault Intercessors, the snazzy Blood Angels Captain, and 6 of these guys for £100 or $168. Not too bad if you have a bit more use for some more Assault Intercessors, maybe not quite so standout if you've got loads of them. The miniatures themselves did have a pretty rocky reception with 10th edition. They did feel like they were a bit of a swing and miss for a lot of people. Perhaps just with all the cool ways that they could do winged jump packs, but Games Workshop decided to ditch their iconic wings from the previous miniatures, and the models have a few more criticisms beyond that. A fair few people aren't the biggest fan of their Stormcast-like helms, and I'm not sure that a reduction of the squad size from 5 down to 3 really helped the deal either. Not everyone dislikes them, but I feel like there was a bit more potential that they missed. In a recent channel poll, 60% of people said they preferred the old ones to these guys. They did gain a fun wargear option at least though. You get to choose between blades and spears for the equipment for the squad, so I guess that was one thing added. If you are looking to pick them up on release, then there's plenty of discount retailers links down in the video description as always, anywhere between 10 and 20% off Warhammer 40k models around the world. And a big thank you to any people who use those when they're ordering in models. It does go to help support the channel and the videos. Moving on to their rules in the new Blood Angels Codex though. Here's the datasheet for the Sanguinary Guard. As you'd expect, they're jump infantry with a 12-inch move and fly, but compared with most Space Marine jump infantry, they're unusually tough. They've got a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, and were boosted up to 3 wounds from 2 in the Codex. Basically, each one individually is only 1 point of toughness away from essentially being flying Terminators, so fairly sturdy on a per model basis, but it does mean that they're going to be quite expensive per model as well. As with most jump infantry, they get to Deep Strike, so that could mean that you could have some charges out of Deep Strike with Dante perhaps, or maybe use Rapid Ingress to get them into melee. And that will usually be OC2 as you get a free Sanguinary banner in the unit, and you can take that regardless of whether or not you've got a sword or shield, and that makes them all OC2 rather than OC1. The 2+ save does have potential for dealing with a lot of damage as well. If you can get them either cover or use Armour of Contempt, you can make quite a lot of low AP damage go away. Then for their weapons, first up they have their ranged damage. The vast majority of the squad fight with their Angelus bolt guns again now. You only get 1 Inferno pistol per unit, which I think probably is worth the upgrade even if it's shorter range. That's a single melter shot, but the standard guys get 2 shots at 12 inches, strength 4 AP 0, damage 1 and pistol. A little bit of a help with horde clearance there, though far less meaningful than their melee profiles. For their close combat weapons, you get either the option of the Uncommon Blade or the Uncommon Spear, and these both have a similar sort of profile. They're both strength 6 and damage 2 weapons that hit on a 3+. Then you basically have the choice of getting a boosted profile of attacks and extra AP with the blade, that strikes at 4 attacks and AP 3, or you can choose fewer attacks and less AP but gaining the Lance keyword for +1 to wound on the charge. So the spear strikes at 3 attacks, strength 6, AP 2, damage 2, but has Lance for a little bit more punch against tough stuff. For those profiles, I'd say that neither one of them is astronomically ahead of the other one, but I would argue that the blades are better overall. Here's the damage breakdown in terms of wounds dealt for 3 models. Basically, the Uncommon Blades win against the vast majority of normal-sized targets, and if the AP matters, they still win against sort of medium vehicles like Rhinos or Predator tanks. They only really fall down against things like Land Raiders when the spears get the charge, though they are quite considerably ahead whenever they don't have the charge, so it means that if they get embroiled in a longer combat, the blades are definitely going to have a big advantage. Realistically, I'm sure quite a lot of Blood Angels armies will still be using the Liberator Assault group with a +2 strength and +1 attack on the charge. That one doesn't really hugely change these numbers too much, and the blades still remain ahead. Technically, the spears catch up a little bit against anything where the strength buff doesn't make a difference, and the blades catch up a bit more on anything where that strength buff equates to a +1 to wound, as it just makes the lance keyword a little bit less critical. To be honest though, I feel like with kind of similar looking weapons, most people wouldn't mind just assembling the way that looks coolest and just make it very clear to the opponent at the start of the game which profile you're using. Finally, for their special rules, they basically have two slightly overlapping defensive buffs in melee. Angelic Visage with their shiny gold armor and death masks gives them a -1 to hit in melee, and then if they're being led by a character, they also get a -1 to wound in melee as well. A bit of a fairly standard bodyguard rule there with a -1 to wound, though it is maybe a bit disappointing that it was locked to melee only. If they've got both of those active though, it's definitely going to make them a trickier proposition to charge and kill. Those two rules will absorb a fair bit of damage, and it would mean that opponents are going to be a lot more incentivized to try and take them down at range rather than risk them in close combat. Overall, between all that, they basically look like they have good potential to be a scary close combat unit that's really quite general purpose. Now that Death Company can't take mass power fists, they're the only Blood Angels jump units that can take good AP damage to things across the whole unit, and that's definitely an interesting niche, meaning they're going to be a lot better at punching up against really tough monsters and vehicles and things, as well as taking down a lot of elite infantry, at least compared with things like Vanguard veterans or jump intercessors. They seem like they've got good synergy both with the Liberator Assault group, with the buff on the charge and the Red Rampage stratagem, and also have lots of good support options with Angelic Host as well. Plus, as mentioned, they're unusually tough to kill in melee. On the flip side, it does look like they're going to be kind of weak to certain profiles for ranged attacks. At the sort of 45 to 50 points, I'd expect them to be priced. 3 wounds at that profile isn't nothing, but it also isn't particularly tough. Obviously, small arms will have trouble, but any sort of special or heavy weapons will have good efficiency against them. They do have lots of competitor units, which might be better for the right roles. Jump infantry, Death Company and Vanguard veterans all could potentially be stronger depending on points. And they are maybe a little bit less flexible than character attachment compared with a bunch of those others, not being able to take the Death Company chaplains and not being able to use the jump chaplain either, though they can take Dante and the regular captain. For unit support for core Codex Space Marine things, Oath of Moment is always an option if they want to reroll some hit rolls. It's nice enough when they're hitting on 3s, but won't be all that relevant when Dante is leading them. Armour of Contempt is pretty good on 2+ saves as mentioned, particularly if they also have cover. You could be saving AP2 things still on that 2+ if you do that. They do have the grenade keyword, which could be handy to drop off a few mortal wounds against a tough target if they're worried about having enough damage to take it down. Rapid Ingress could be an interesting way to deliver them, have them turn up somewhere safe behind a ruin at the end of the enemy turn, and then strike out big on yours. And as with most melee things, could be an interesting one for heroic intervention, potentially working with other melee units or chaff units to give them some scary defense. For their character support options, they basically have these two, Dante and the Jump Captain. Currently the Jump Captain's 85 points in Codex Space Marines. He of course gives you his discounted stratagems for 1 command point less, and given the Blood Angels ones they have access to, such as Advance and Charge in multiple detachments or Red Rampage in Liberator, they're definitely going to get good value out of those stratagems. He also has a Power Fist, so chips in far better than most against enemy tanks and vehicles. He'll be up to strength 11 on the charge if you're playing the Liberator group. He gives the rest of the squad a +1 strength on the charge as well, so that will get them to either strength 7 or strength 9 detachment depending. 5 attacks per guy at strength 9 seems fairly intimidating with the blades, and he is also the option to get enhancements into the unit if you want them. Dante on the other hand is a bit pricier. He was 120 points pre-Codex, and I think he'd be unlikely to go down in cost, given that the Codex gave him a couple of small but useful buffs. The presence of the Chapter Master himself gives the squad a +1 to hit in melee, so that's usually equating to a 25% damage boost there. He gives them a +1 to advance and charge to help them get into combat, so that could be an 8-inch deep strike charge, which has a 2/3 chance to succeed if you budget a command reroll. Definitely possible and could be devastating, though seems a bit on the risky side for quite such a points heavy unit. If he starts with them on the board though, the threat range is still pretty massive. If you use one of the advance and charge stratagems, that means his unit would have a 2-inch boost to their threat range, going up to almost 25 inches on average. Beyond that, in melee he gets 8 attacks at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 2 with lethal hits, and it definitely helps against tougher stuff, given that he might be strength 10 in the Liberator Assault group. And finally he also gives a -1 to test Battle Shock at the start of the fight phase, which could maybe be good for occasionally interrupting some enemy stratagems from happening, though it's a bit unreliable and presumes that they want to use them in the first place. Overall, between all that, he does seem like a pretty reasonable addition to a unit. Even just Dante and a unit of 3 of them is a pretty formidable threat to reckon with. At first glance, both of these seem absolutely fine. I'd probably rate Dante as the stronger looking out of the 2 of them, even with the increased points cost, but they both seem useful. Next up, we've got the Blood Angels detachments. They don't really get too much from the Death Company one, as you'd expect, but they get plenty from the Liberator Assault group and the Angelic Host. As mentioned, the Liberator formation is +2 strength and +1 attack, so 5 attacks at strength 9 and damage 2 with the blades. The Advance and Charge stratagem gives them a terrifying threat range, 23 inches on average, just with their base movement, and 25 inches with Dante. The unit that uses that is going to be able to get places that the opponent doesn't want it to, ideally castled up in a ground floor ruin and then leaping forwards. Red Rampage is a seriously scary one to help take down tough stuff, lance and or lethal hits depending on whether or not you take the Battle Shock. With that thrown in, even just a unit of 3 of them have got a good chance to take down a standard battle tank. Just 3 with blades do around about 10 wounds to a toughness 10 at 3+ save vehicle, never mind if they've got a bigger squad or character attached. Then perhaps for other standout stuff, that Speed of the Primarch enhancement is a really nasty once per game fights first. If they were hard to deal with in melee already, that just makes them yet more so, as anything that charges them is going to take a whole load of blade attacks before they get to strike. I'd say that Liberator still feels maybe the scariest for all around raw strength with that damage boost, but Angelic Host also has loads of great rules to support them. That's the one where you can redeploy jump infantry back into the sky, Grey Knight style, and I guess it could be useful on the Sanguinary Guard. Maybe move them around to set them up in a different ruin to safely keep safe from enemy fire, and then charge from there in the next turn. I guess you could risk that risky 8-inch charge with a reroll with Dante perhaps, though in reality I feel like it might be kind of sparingly used on these guys only when it makes sense, and maybe a bit more of a staple for things like Inceptors or Jump Intercessors doing objectives. Besides that though, they've also got the Advance and Charge option, so great threat range there. Unbridled Ardour, a Sanguinary Guard specific one for reroll hits against one nominated unit that slew one of yours. I guess if you take loads of them then that could actually be a big deal. And beyond that, lots of other good stuff. 1 command point for lethal hits and precision, which could be fun to snipe characters. A 3-inch deep strike if that made sense for some reason. Angel Sacrifice, where maybe you could have a cheap unit like some Jump Intercessors tank all the hits in a melee for them. And a cool enhancement that gives them a reactive movement in the Gleaming Pinions. Overall, if they're costed right, they feel like they'll be a pretty standout unit in both of these. Beyond that, they can be used in the other Codex attachments, though I feel like, unless things change in a big way, this will be second place to the Codex ones. Gladiators may be the next most interesting, Advance and Charge, and their nice Lance and extra AP stratagem. In Stormlance they could Advance and Charge as well, Vanguard could get them cover and -1 to hit, and Firestorm could use +1 to wound if desired. In reality though, I'd guess that most people are going to be going core Codex. Overall, I think it feels like broadly good news for the Sanguinary Guard. Obviously actual strength is going to be very points dependent. I feel like somewhere in the region of 145 points would have them being an interesting enough unit. The previous 5-man Sanguinary Guard squad was 155 points, but had worse stat lines both in damage and defense, though I feel like the loss of models from 5 to 3 of them probably warrants a small points decrease, even if they both got a lot tougher and a lot scarier per model. I guess for competition within the Codex, the biggest one might be Death Company, with a unit of 5 of them being able to take 2 Power Fists and an Eviscerator. They're still perhaps their biggest rivals for jump infantry that can actually take down tough stuff a bit better. On the charge, they can be strength 10 with a whole bunch of attacks that reroll hit rolls and get access to scary chaplains like Lamatias and Astarath. I feel like either one of those units could be the way to go, points depending, and definitely could have some of each to use different characters or stratagems on. In game, both squads of 3 or 6 look interesting enough to be run in those 2 different ways. A big 6-man unit would certainly justify characters, though you might be getting to the point where you've just got so much damage that you overkill most things. Feels like either small squads or big squads would work. And to use them in game, I'd either think about doing Blood Angels things, moving them up to a staging ground in a ruin that's on the edge of the deployment zone or in the midfield perhaps, making sure the enemy doesn't shoot them before they get to charge something, and then leaping on something important, maybe using advance and charge to reach it if they need to, and potentially using Red Rampage or the lethal hit stratagem from Angelic Host if they need to punch up against something tough. Otherwise, rapid ingress seems very reasonable as well. Put them down somewhere safe and have them jump out the next turn. That could be another good way to get them to melee, depending on what else you have using that. If they get the choice of targets, maybe elite infantry without invulnerable saves could be one of the best choices if they have the option for it. Though I feel like their damage output is general purpose enough to threaten most things, particularly with Red Rampage. Finally, as mentioned, I feel like Dante looks like the most interesting for helping them get where they need to be and delivering a lot more damage when they get there. Plus, having an attached character does help out with their -1 to wound rule. In any case though, let me know what you make of the Sanguinary Guard in 10th edition. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.